Great. Thanks, Tammy. So my legal name is Jonathan Taylor. Most people call me John. So you can call me that, refer to me that way. I am a clinical social worker based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. My primary specialty is working with folks who have sexually compulsive problems or sexually addictive problems, their spouses, and any related trauma. I came to this field through my own recovery, and the thing that has kept me in this field is that it is endlessly fascinating, especially the relationship side of things, and that's what I really enjoy working with. I am training with the Gottman Institute out of Seattle um, to certify as a Gottman certified therapist. So I love the research on relationships. I do a lot of marital work. I also do a couple of side projects in addition to the clients I see each week. I help run intensives for men who have relationships that are too close with mom and getting in the way of their other intimate relationships. And I also do intensives helping people take their recovery one layer deeper. Most recently, we've been doing some really fun dating and recovery intensives. So I'm really excited to be doing this weekly group because I think one of the greatest potentials that's unlocked in recovery is the potential to have relationships that you didn't even know were possible, or quality relationships that you didn't know were possible. I think our individual recoveries can set us up beautifully to have the kind of relationships that we've always longed for, we've been hungry for, we've always needed. So I'm hoping that's what we can talk about, and that's where you can find some benefit. So for today's topic, how to make any relationship work, I'm going to talk about some points, maybe some principles in relationships that we see across the board, whether it's romantic relationships, business relationships, family relationships, friendships. These principles, almost universally in any kind of relationship, they make a big difference in how that relationship feels. So we'll just dive in and talk about those, and then we'll do some Q&A. So the first one that I think is really important in relationships is you have to be different from the person you're in a relationship with. Has anyone ever been in a relationship where they feel like they are an echo chamber, or where that is the expectation in the relationship, that I like you because you're like me? In order to have real quality relationships, we have to have some differentiation going on. There has to be a me and there has to be a you. And I think that's where the big payoff in relationships is. If I know that somebody likes me because I make myself likable to that person, that's not as rewarding as knowing that this person likes me and accepts me because I'm me and they see me for me. So whether it's a romantic relationship, whether it's at work, I think when we can be different, when we can stand out, when we can authentically be ourselves, that's one of the things that makes relationships really rewarding. Also, I think skills are important in relationships. It's really interesting when we dive into the research about what makes relationships work. So much of it is counterintuitive. Like, for example, one of my favorite pieces that comes out of the Gottman's research around marriages is they say couples who make it work, they do a really good job at listening to the words and not the tone of their partner. And so they take the meaning from what's said versus, just what we get in the body language, or what we imagine our partner really means. And when you are face to face with somebody in a high stakes relationship, you're reading every cue, you're listening to every inflection. And most of the time, the data that we pick up in that really feeds our fear instead of feeds our ability to connect. So good relationship skills, I think, help to ground us in a focus on connection rather than a fear around disconnection. And for most of the folks I work with in recovery, they didn't have great teachers to teach them these relationship skills. So being mindful about that and being deliberate about that in our recoveries helps a lot. Honesty, I think, is also really important in relationships. And in the rooms in recovery, we talk about honesty and we talk about transparency. And I think those are two very, very different things. I don't know that transparency is required for any kind of relationship to work. Like, for example, if you have a job and you really hate your boss, I would not recommend being transparent about that. I would recommend being honest with yourself. If that is a deal breaker factor, you might need to look for a different place to work, or you might need to seek an opportunity to work through whatever that is that has you disliking your boss. But marching in and telling your boss, hey, I really hate you, you make my life miserable, that's not going to get you what you need in your work relationship. This also comes out of the Gottman marriage therapy research that if you are if your spouse is having a hard time and they're really distressed over something that's happening outside of the relationship, if you want to strengthen your connection, you always take your spouse's side, even if you think they're crazy. What that communicates to your spouse is that the connection with them is important to you and that you're willing to take on their perspective so that they can feel safe. Later on, after we do that kind of stuff, then we might circle back and say, as much as I understand where you're coming from, that's not how I'm seeing things right now. Are you open to some feedback? Are you open to another perspective? The transparent part of us may look at our spouse and say, or our partner and say, you're really crazy for feeling that and thinking that, and we blow up the relationship when we don't need to. So honesty is the ability to, I think, maintain a willingness to talk about where we're at and the ability to do that in a measured way. So when it's appropriate for the situation, when it serves connection, we can be very honest rather than wearing our heart on our sleeve. In fact, I think a really important part of making relationships work is being able to contain ourselves adequately so that our reality doesn't overwhelm somebody else's or overwhelm somebody else. The last part of what I feel like makes relationships work, and I would say this is the most important one, is you have to want to be in the relationship. Bonds are made when a figurative or a literal gun is held to your head, and we call that the Stockholm Syndrome. That's where you bond with somebody who is holding you hostage physically or emotionally because your survival depends on it. But I think the kind of relationships where you really get to be yourself and you really get to grow and be fed by that relationship are relationships that we choose to be in. That can be difficult because some of us have relationships with exes or even families of origin that aren't going to go anywhere in our lifetime. We're bound together. And sometimes we have to figure out which aspects of the relationship we want and can say yes to, and which ones we need to have really good boundaries with. Other times we may, in childhood, I look back at my friendships. Most of them were relationships of convenience. These kids lived down the street from me. It was easy to get to their house. We were in the same classes. They weren't necessarily people I chose because they were good for me. And as we grow into adulthood, I think we do a lot more pruning of those relationships. And we start really looking at, what does this relationship do for me? What parts of me come out? And for me, that all comes back to wanting to be there. There's some relationships that I will choose to work through really, really difficult things because that relationship is important to me. Like with my children, with my spouse, with my siblings, those are important relationships to me. Other relationships, they may be a little more expendable, and it's important to know kind of where you stand with each relationship. So that's kind of my overview introduction on things that make any relationship work. We're opening this up to questions now. If you have questions, click on the Q&A at the bottom of the page. And
well, I've got some I'm going to ask you a couple questions too, because you said look at relationships, and you're talking about examining a relationship, and I totally agree with that. But I also know that there's the emotional stuff, and so sometimes it's hard to look at something in a more logical, almost mindful way when I've got emotions, whether it's the boss and you go, okay, there's this turbulent relationship, but I really need this job. So then there's the fear aspect, or I love this person so much and all my emotion is I love. And even regardless of the like what somebody might say, red flags or whatever. So do you have any tips on how we can maybe step back to look at those relations? Like when you're talking about childhood things, sure, that's, but as adults, how do we even start taking a step back to look at those?
Yeah. Generally if there's any part of an evaluation of a relationship that comes up that's going to be distressing, our bodies are going to register that. We see that all over in the literature. Like if something makes us anxious, our heart rates will go up. We may sweat a little bit more. We may breathe a little more shallow. So a really good first step is take a deep breath with any data that comes in about a relationship. Calm your body down, and look at it as information. So, there's like you said, Tammy, there's some relationships where the overall feeling is I love this, I love this, I love this, and I may not be able to see some of the parts that might be concerning. So when I get a glimpse of that, taking a breath and letting that information exist rather than rushing to make the story all one thing. One of my favorite insights into relationships as I've gone through recovery and moved into adulthood is nobody's all gold and nobody's all BS. Like we're a mix of the two. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the more of both sides I see of a person, the more full a picture I have there. I think it's important too in relationships to be aware of what our deal breakers might be. I think I can recommend this with confidence. I wouldn't recommend that you're in a relationship with anyone who abuses you in any way, verbally, physically, emotionally, sexually. So yeah, I think being able to look at the information that comes from our relationships and identify if that crosses one of our bottom lines or if it's something that we're willing to work through.
I think that's really helpful. And we were talking about differentiation, and I thought immediately of my husband, and like we are opposites and we're such good balance for each other. I can only imagine I'm fairly high energy, he's fairly low key, and if we were both either low key, we'd never get anything done, or if we're both high energy, we'd never circle back around. So finding somebody that's complementary to that. And I've always thought that even in a work situation, I don't want mini me's. I want people who right. can look at things from a different perspective and give me information that would be useful. I liked the honesty versus transparency. I think that's really helpful. And I think sometimes it's being honest with ourselves too about, because I want to have the starry eyes about a romantic relationship and everything, but understanding that it's not a deal breaker, but I just need to understand this person's a human and, and I always think about, somebody said this person let me down, and I'm thinking, I know for sure I've let other people down too. So finding that range of we're human and we're willing to grow and learn without it being an abusive relationship.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite pieces of research from the Gottmans is in marriages, they showed that 69% of issues between couples are non-resolvable. That doesn't mean that they're hard now. That doesn't mean that it's a speed bump. It means you will not see eye to eye on nearly 70% of what the two of you experience together. So there's a couple things that tells me is, and this was in happy couples, not with every couple. Happy couples, 69% of issues they weren't going to be resolving. Wow. First of all, it tells me that the threshold is a lot lower than we think. We can make it work on 31%.
Wow, that's amazing.
And the second thing that it tells me is that maybe the substance of a connected relationship is not sameness or feeling in sync all the time. It's that commitment to working it through. I can think of some professional relationships that I've had that are fraught, they're difficult emotionally to be around, but it's a really valuable relationship, and that connection brings far more good than bad. And so accepting that as okay, here's the human factor of this relationship. I'm good with that. Let's get to work.
Well, and I think sometimes having realistic expectations about the relationship, it's okay, I value this aspect of it. So this is where the focus of my relationship with that person is versus, they're 100% in my life kind of thing too. So that's interesting. We do have a question. This person says, I have a family member who I found out has been spying on me with a camera. Only because he is a family member do I feel he should remain somewhat in our lives. I am finding it very hard, though, to move on and fully forgive him. Any suggestions? I'm curious to know, does this person know that and feel free to add into this, does this person know that you found out that this person was spying on you? And I'm also curious, I'm thinking it was probably inappropriate, not just general detective work, but any other information. But any thoughts on what you've heard?
Yeah. So a couple of things.
Oh, they say yes, they know, and yes, inappropriate. So that's
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that definitely puts, I think, a fine point on the situation here. So a couple things. The first thing that's standing out to me is this person is talking about fully forgiving, and forgiveness for a lot of us growing up was an imperative. It might have been religious. It might have been a family rule. I really love the clinical work that's done on forgiveness because it takes it out of this, like, I have to make things work realm, and it looks at what actually is forgiveness. And we look at forgiveness as we're freeing ourselves from emotions that we have a right to feel, but they no longer serve us. So what I would look at in this situation, and any other similar situation, some of this feeling of I want to be away from this person, is that serving you? Does that help you to be careful? Does that help you to maintain appropriate boundaries? Forgiveness is not a wiping of the slate and returning to things as if they never happened. Sometimes forgiveness is, you still get to have a place in my life, but I define that place now. So, something to consider is it may not be safe for you to drop some of the really negative emotions until you have some safety in place. So you might want to find out what kind of boundaries you need, and to be able to stick to those. If that's, I don't have any electronic connection with this person because, maybe they hacked my webcam, or maybe this person doesn't come in my home because they left cameras there, or whatever that looks like. So I would, when we're considering, like, what do I do to be able to move on, we have to consider what role could this person have in my life going forward that I'm okay with, that feels safe enough to me, and that also is workable in our relationships. And those don't have to be mutually exclusive. So cooling off periods when there's a betrayal like this, I think, are really important. And even, I think this is back to that honest communication aspect of a relationship. I think being able to say, I'm not quite sure what this relationship means to me now or what I need, but I do know that I need a break to figure that out. So we may have no contact for a while, or we may not go to functions where this person is for a while, in order for us to figure that out and to see what possibilities open up for us.
And this person does say we have placed boundaries in place to feel safe, so that's great. But and hopefully this person is getting help that they clearly need, because that is definitely a situation that if it was happening with you, it could be happening with other people as well. So
also keep in mind, forgiveness, it generally unfolds organically. It's not something that we can make happen. So in any relationship, I think our emotions are some of the best sense we have of what's going on in that relationship. So if the emotions are still saying, I'm not sure, listen to those, see what you need there.
Yeah, well, and I recently was reading some information about forgiveness as well, and it all kept coming back to it. I do forgive because I need to be released from it. It's got almost nothing to do with the other person. It really is about toxic emotion for myself. So, but I agree, it takes time, and if there's stuff that keeps coming up, then it's not quite time yet. So
I really like Robert Enright's book, Forgiveness is a Choice. And in there, one of the first steps in forgiving, he basically says, it's hard to forgive. It's hard to let go of something we didn't know we were holding. So one of the first steps of forgiveness is to take an inventory of what it is we're holding on to and what it is that hurts. And that's one of those counterintuitive steps in a relationship. It's almost like, I'm going to take a little closer look at why I'm feeling so bad, so that when I choose to forgive, I am knowingly letting go of feelings that I have a right to feel, but that no longer serve me. And that's a hard part of forgiveness.
Yeah, but that's so true too. It's like I have a right to feel these, but but they're just hurting me. I remember somebody telling me that I was letting somebody live rent free in my mind, because
Yeah.
I couldn't let go of this, which only further aggravated me because it kept turning it back to me. But when I
Yeah.
finally understood that I have the ability and the choice eventually when it's the right time to let go of all of this and to have the inner peace that that I personally crave, that was really helpful for me. So there's
Yeah.
another question. I am familiar with the Gottman's work. Can you talk a little about the different ways we can betray each other in relationships? That's a long question. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think there's the obvious here. There's the affairs and infidelities and things like that. I'll talk a little more about some of the subtle ways we do it, because I think, again, this is fascinating when it comes to relationships. So a lot of the way that the Gottmans got their data on couples is they would put them in what they called their love lab. And it was basically this apartment at the Gottman facility where this couple would live for a weekend. They would buy groceries, order in food, live their lives normally. There was a TV, there was newspapers. They would also hook them up to biomonitors. And so their heart rate was measured, their skin conductance or their sweatiness was measured. There were cameras everywhere so they could, read and code facial expressions and things like that. One of the most interesting things that came out of that, they showed this clip of this couple. I think she's in the kitchen doing something and he's on the couch reading a newspaper. And it must have been a really slow news day, because the stuff he was commenting on was like, local dog has 18 puppies or something like that. And she's in the kitchen and she's involved with what she's doing, but you could tell that she was listening. And she made kind of a grunt like, oh, or like, mm-hmm. And they paused the video and they said, this is one of the things that makes this a couple who's going to make it, is that when he calls, there's a response. And vice versa. They showed in the same couple, she was talking about something that you could tell was not engrossing to him, but he gave her an indication that I'm here and I'm listening. And it was either, like eye contact or whatever. So when we stop validating the people we're in relationships with, the most basic form of validation is eye-to-eye validation. That's what we start to rely on as children, as infants. I can see you and I know that you're seeing me. When we don't give that to somebody, that's a betrayal on a very visceral level. When our feelings, our thoughts, our interests, when those are outright dismissed, I think that's the kind of betrayal that in relationships we can get into on a daily basis, that I think have the power to be far more corrosive than an affair, or far more corrosive than an addiction. Brene Brown, in her lecture on trust, she dives into the research on what makes trust built. Another thing that betrays in relationships that she talks about in there is, she says one of the things that allows us to trust another person is we know when we give them something confidential that it goes into the vault. So this is something that we often don't think about, is gossip is a big betrayal in a relationship, even if that person doesn't gossip about you. Because if your best friend comes and sits down to you next to you and they tell you all the dirty laundry that they just heard from this other friend of yours, how likely are you going to be to tell that person your dirty laundry? Not likely at all, because you know that they're going to use it to hotwire a connection with somebody else. So even kind of how we choose to connect and what we choose to talk about with our partner, it can either be connecting, or it can be, again, one of those little, like, just chipping away at the connection in the relationship. So gossip and divulging secrets are some of the ways that we betray each other as well. I think on a more philosophical level, not being ourselves authentically is a betrayal to a relationship. I can't count how many couples I've worked with who had this avoidance pattern around one or both partners not being fully known by the other partner, because they felt like this was going to be grounds to reject me on. When we're in the beginning of a relationship, it's very rewarding and also very vulnerable when, on a first date, your taste in music could either make or break the relationship. And when we hear from that person like, oh, I love that music too, or that's not my favorite, but you'll have to have me listen to this sometime so I can know why you like it. That's a big payoff. Unfortunately, as we go on in relationships, it can't just all be about music and the food that we like. We have to dig a little bit deeper. And when we start to feel like the price of being me is too high in this relationship, or I don't know if this person is going to pick me, we can really hold back, and we can start an opportunity for our partner to miss out on who we really are. And there's many couples that I've worked with who one partner will divulge, like I'm 5 years into this faith crisis, for example, and I've never told you what I really think and what I really feel. And their partner will almost do this like, oh, is that it? Like, I felt you distancing from me, and I thought it was something else. Like, we can do a faith crisis. Or they may even say, I have a lot of those same concerns. Why haven't we been talking about it? So I think kind of that like holding back in order to protect you from me, I think is a betrayal to the relationship. We can do this at work too, where we may hate where we are or hate what we do, and we're dissatisfied, and we show up every day and we're not as productive as we could be. We don't bring our passion and our creativity. We just kind of show up and, punch the clock, which some jobs that may be fine for us and that may be fine for our employer. I think when it comes to our careers, being able to have a little bit of our heart in it is important. And if we're in a place where our soul is crushed every day by what we do and who we do it with at work, one of the best things we can do for that relationship is to say, this isn't working well for me. I think I'm ready to move on to something else.
Yeah, I was thinking too about betrayals. One of the things, I think it's a betrayal to the relationship if you aren't able to be your true self, because I'm thinking that if I can't, especially in a romantic relationship, if I'm not, or even a best friend, it's like if I always have to stay on guard and protect, have a mask on or whatever, then you don't really know me. And I remember in a previous relationship thinking, if that person knew me, they wouldn't like me, so I had to be something different. And and obviously that it was a previous relationship. It didn't work, because, I'm not being my true self. So, you're constantly, and I think about it, in the addiction field, there's always this, I shouldn't say always, I try not to use always and nevers, but often I hear that there's this distance between what the person, really is and what they're doing and what their partner or spouse, thinks they're doing. And so that, that gap is, I think a betrayal, not having the conversation. I was talking to somebody completely off the field earlier today. It was about Zoom, because we use the Zoom platform, and he's like, what do you see as the biggest things with relationships? And I said, probably, money and sex, but a lot of it is just not having the communication. It's like, if you can't talk to your other person about who you really are, what your values are for whatever, what you're looking for, whatever, that creates a distance, and creates opportunity for people to look for it elsewhere too. So
yeah.
Okay, so next question: what about a partner who uses "this is who I am" to justify bad behavior and actions?
Yeah, this is a tough situation. I think this can lead to feeling like we're held hostage in a relationship when somebody tells us basically, the problem's not with me, it's with you, because this is just who I am. There's again, I look back to some of the research the Gottmans did. I'm reading a lot of Gottman right now, so there's a lot of other really good relationship stuff out there, but I'm kind of immersed in their stuff right now. And they say when you're working with couples, you should believe what both of them tell you, because there's truth there. And so I think when we are face to face with somebody around a really difficult issue, and they're telling us, this is who I am, a lot of our dysfunctional relationships are built on the possibility of what they could be, the promise of what they could be, rather than the reality. So I think this is one of those things, like you brought up earlier, Tammy, where it can be really important to take a deep breath and to say, does this actually fit with this person that I know? This is just who I am. Is this what they're telling me over and over again? And what does that mean for me if this is who I am? One of the things that is endlessly fascinating to me about relationships is it actually doesn't take two incredibly healthy people to make a wonderful relationship. It takes people who are willing to be vulnerable, who are committed to each other, and who are willing to engage in difficult conversations and difficult situations together. So if you're hearing from a partner, this is just who I am, you have to evaluate, is that acceptable to me? Does that cross one of my bottom lines? And it's important too. Dan Savage talks about this in a YouTube clip that I just love. Dan Savage is an author and a podcast host, and he talks a lot about sex, love, and relationships. And he says you get 5 deal breakers, and if you have more than 5 deal breakers, you are the problem in all of your relationships. So if we're getting this is who I am from our partner, it's important to look at, does this cross one of my deal breakers? Does this fundamentally conflict with who I am and what I need? And we might have some really difficult decisions to make ahead of that. I think one of the things that doesn't work great in a relationship is when somebody's telling us this story about who they are, to try to convince them otherwise. It might be a good place to have a boundary to say, if this is who you are and you want this relationship, I need you to go and see a therapist to help you figure out how you're going to make this work in a relationship, or what this means for you. That might be one of our boundaries. I can be in a relationship with you if I know that we're both working on ourselves, or we're working on this issue. That's a tough situation.
Yeah, well, and I don't want to overshare, but I was personally involved with somebody who was like, if you want to change, that's fine, but I'm happy with who I am. And at the end of the day, that was a deal breaker for me. I want to continue to grow, and I wanted us to grow together, and that wasn't going to work. So, but it all worked out how it was supposed to. So, okay. So next question, this is a couple that is in. She's saying, I am in a situation that anybody would deem a toxic relationship, encompassed with verbal and physical abuse, as well as sex addiction. So this is the wife on part of her husband. They're working with professionals. They're both workaholics, but they're trying to step back and find a healthy balance, and they have 2 kids. They're currently reading Out of the Doghouse. She's read Prodependence, and trying to focus on activities around positive family activities as directed by our therapist. However, I would love to approach relationship building activities between my husband and myself as well. We are seeking something different than just the standard going out for dinner and a date, so to speak. We want to build our relationship and gain better appreciation for smaller things that draw us together. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Again, a really difficult situation, but I really admire the commitment here. I can feel that coming out. The first thing that I would address in this is that first line, what any sane person would deem a toxic relationship. I'll just say, when I was in graduate school and I got an introduction to working with women who were in relationships where they were battered. And I could not wrap my mind around why anyone would want to stay there. And what I learned both in that class and my subsequent work is relationships are far more complicated than they treat me nice and I feel good, so I'll stay, or this is bad and I feel bad, so I'm going to leave. It's far more defined between the 2 people and what works and what doesn't work than some standard of health and non-health. The other part of this question, which I really love, and I just interviewed Rob on my podcast last Friday. It should actually post today, talking about prodependence. And he talked about how we intuitively know where to go to get the connection that we and our partner are capable of. And that's the kind of thing that we want to foster. And I feel that in here. we want to do more than just going to dinner and dating, so to speak. We want to grow our relationship and gain a better appreciation for the smaller things that draw us together. That is the foundation of connection. Back to the Gottman's theory, they have what they call the sound relationship house. You have walls of trust and commitment, and the foundation is what they call love maps, which, again, as I look at couples in crisis, this is one of those things that my gut would not have told me the right place to go. Love maps are what we know about our partner and what our partner knows about us. And it's really, really basic stuff. So like knowing who your partner's best friends are, knowing what stresses are coming up in their life, knowing what they're most proud of. This is stuff that you probably talked a lot about when you were dating. And then we all make this assumption that, oh, we've been there, we've done that, I already know this about them. And the truth is that changes all the time for us. You know, in a 24-hour time period, you may spend less than half of that time actually together and interacting. So you have all this separate time and space where you're developing as a person. There's a really great resource in any app store. If you go to your app store and you type Gottman, I think the app is Card Decks, or it's called Decks or something like that. The Gottmans developed this primarily to help with this love map stuff. Let me pull it up here on my phone. Because again, Card Decks is the name of the app. It's real counterintuitive here. But these kind of questions, knowing them and being known on them, makes a huge difference in the kind of connection that we feel. So like, because I'm a therapist and a nerd, when I go out with my spouse, I bring my phone, and if conversation lulls, I pull it out, and we'll talk about this. So the question that I have up here, this is what the interface looks like.
Oh, that's good.
The question is, who is your partner's least favorite person you both know? And these are open-ended questions. You can't answer them yes or no. And it causes me to guess. Like, you know, last week I had this conversation with my spouse, and I think it's this person. And I may guess that, and she may say, well, that was the case last week, but guess what happened today? And then this story launches, and I find out this part of my partner's life that I didn't know anything about. And my map, my view of her internal world is updated. I have information that I didn't have before. And the key is, it's these smaller things that draw us together. It's not some like take a big romantic vacation, you know, take a retreat, whatever. It's really this, are there small ways that I can be known by you and I can let you know me each day? And as I would draw a correlation, this is, for me, this was kind of the big reveal of today's group. All of these things we're talking about in relationships, you have worked on an individual level in your recovery. So if you're a 12-stepper, step 10 says that you'll take daily inventory. This kind of like, how are you doing? This is another thing that came out of the Gottman's research, is couples who knew what was going on in each other's days were happier. So if they had this ritual around leaving in the morning and saying, what do you got going on today? And it took 30 seconds of connection, that may seem like a really small, not important conversation to have, but it's very, very important to know. And on a daily basis in our individual recoveries, we're taking stock. What's going on for me? What do I feel today? What do I need today? And that may change and that may shift. So looking for those small things, those rituals of connection, that bit of information that you may take for granted, those are the kind of things that over time build a very strong relationship. I would also recommend for anybody in recovery with their spouse, the relationship is not going to heal itself as the two of you get better individually. So working with a competent couples therapist who I think also understands whatever thing it is that you guys are recovering from or your spouse is recovering from, that's a big help too, because another part of this near the foundation part is modifying the way that we do conflict. If I get really overwhelmed with emotion and the way I do conflict is I get really quiet and I stop looking at you, you're going to read that as, oh, he doesn't care. The truth is, when we flood like that, it's because we deeply care and we feel a lot of emotions around this. We just don't know what to do with it. People can do this at work too. You know, I've worked with people who I thought hated me. And when I finally like one of these that I'm thinking of, it was the last day of this job, and I talked with this person and said, hey, I don't know if there's something I did wrong. And they said, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm just really intimidated by you. I don't know how to approach you. And I made the assumption that they didn't like me and didn't have an opportunity for this relationship to develop. So kind of looking at how we do conflict in a coupleship, I think, is another real foundational thing. But that Card Decks app, I even do it with my kids. They even do have a version for parents and kids that I think it's really easy to take it for granted what our partner's internal world is. And there's really simple things we can do, really simple questions we can ask that keep us updated, that make a world of difference in how connected we feel to each other.
One of the things that I try to do is find out what my husband's, got going on. And then when he gets home from work, say, so how did that go? So that he knows that, like, I connected the dots with that as well, that it's not just, I'm listening for 30 seconds and then I forget about it. It's like, so you were concerned about this. How did that work out, or whatever, I think that those connections. I've also learned not to talk to my husband during a basketball game. So if it was an emergency, I'd turn off the television. But otherwise, like, I make sure that I've got the environment set so that I can have a conversation, rather than when it's all distracted or whatever. So because I want to be, present as well.
Yeah.
So.
I think that communicates a really important level of care. As we know our partner and what they need, we can approach them in effective ways. My spouse is a hairdresser, and one of the things that I found valuable, she does a lot of continuing education so that she can stay up to date on new products and things like that. I try to learn it as well, so that when she talks about work, we can actually have a conversation beyond, like, how'd the haircut go? And she'll be like, well, I cut their hair and I colored it. Like, that there's this recognition on both parts. And she does this with my work too. She's come to conferences with me before, and she reads a lot of what I read. And it's kind of that, like, we're willing to vacation in each other's worlds, not so that we can be intellectually stimulated, although that comes from it, but it communicates this, like, hey, I want to be on your team. And if this is a price I can pay to be on your team, I'd love to pay that price so that I'm on your team.
Great that you have a hairdresser for a while. I can see you save a lot of money with that. So
she helped me manage it until it was just, over the edge there, where there was not enough hair to dress anymore. So
there you go. Okay, next question. When I voice upset regarding my husband's sexual addiction behaviors, he consistently responds with his intentions, and I tell him repeatedly that I can't hear his intentions through his behavior. Do you have advice for dealing with this dynamic in communication? That's a great question.
Yeah. Again, I'll just say these questions are helping me to appreciate, again, that relationships are difficult. They're complicated. They're not black and white. Even if we have 4 go-to skills that will improve any relationship, it's not going to improve all relationships or improve our relationship. So the question here to me speaks to the dynamic in communication. So we have this dance going, and this is really standard in a lot of relationships, where we do the dance that's comfortable for us, not the one that we need to do. So usually that dance is something along the lines, and Sue Johnson talks about this in her research. There's a withdraw and there's an approach. So if I'm withdrawing, my partner who wants connection is going to approach. And if that freaks me out because I need space, I'll withdraw more and more intensely. My partner will pursue more intensely. So as we're looking at the dynamic, whenever we're stuck in a relationship dynamic that's not working for us, again, I think one of the individual recovery skills we get is we go back to, what am I contributing to this? Not the issue around addiction, but the dynamic here. Sometimes we need to be a broken record with our boundaries. And this can be so difficult to do. Like I remember when I was in my early 20s and early mid 20s, and I had decided to get married, and I had saved up time off, and I had enough time off to take 2 weeks off. And so I went to my boss and I said, I need 10 days off. And he's like, great, so you'll be gone Friday through Sunday. And I said, no, I don't need weekends off because I don't work weekends. I need 10 working days off, and you'll see that I have the vacation to do it. And it became really, really frustrating because all the communication he came back with was, well, we need this and we need that. And I had to be a broken record and tell him again exactly what I needed over and over and over. And no joke, it felt like it was 10 back and forths before he finally got it. And he was like, oh, you just want the 2 consecutive weeks off. Yes, that's what I want. You know, and I'll speak from the potential perspective of an addict. I think a lot of addicts are genuinely concerned about losing their relationships, and they're very fearful of that. We don't do our best relationship work from a position of fear. So I'll see a lot of the addicts that I work with who are really good at telling their spouse what they want to hear. And, you know, traditionally we look at that and we just say all addicts are liars and they're manipulative. In some cases, I think we can extend a generous assumption. We can say, maybe this person's really scared of losing me. And so they keep telling me what they think I want to hear. And what I'm feeling on my end is, you're not hitting the target. I'm telling you, this is what I need. And you lay out these beautiful intentions that sound great, but you really don't follow through. Or maybe that's not what's going to work for you. I hear from a lot of spouses that I work with, they'll say, I'd just rather that they were honest with me than they tried to deceive me. So changing that dynamic in the conversation might be continuing to hold that line. This is what I want to see from you. This is what I want to see from you. I appreciate that you have good intentions. Your intentions that's not what I'm interested in right now. I'm interested in seeing a change of behavior. And I would rather get a firm yes or a no from you, or whether you can change this behavior or not, or whether you're committed to changing this behavior, than I am in what you want to do. Because I think we can do amazing things with reality when we hold reality. When we're holding on to fantasy, it's really hard to make things happen. So sticking with what we need it's a relationship skill that serves us in just about any relationship. It's also terrifying because that person may answer, well, I don't want that, or I don't need that, or that person may answer, I can't do that. They may answer it through their words or through their behavior. I really like my colleague Vicki Tidwell Palmer's work around boundaries and the way that she conceptualizes that. She says you set a boundary and you pull back into the safety of that boundary and you observe what's going on so that you can see what the next layer of data is, what the next right step to take is.
One of the things I noticed too is when I voice upset regarding my husband's sexual addiction, and I thought, and I can totally appreciate the upset. So, you know, but I wondered if the husband is thinking, oh, she's upset, so therefore I have to console her. And I wonder if there's a way, if there's language that you could use that it wasn't feeling like it, you know, so that he didn't feel like he has to console. That, you know, I just wonder if there's a different way to say it or to approach it so that it's, you know, I hear what, like you were saying, I hear your intentions, but, you know, but the behavior is what I'm really looking for. Can we take some steps to do this differently or whatever? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think this speaks to another relationship skill that's a little more counterintuitive. No relationship can hold all of our needs. So I come from a culture where relationships between married men and married women are frowned upon at best and fretted over all the time. So when I got married, I ditched a lot of my friendships with women because that's what I was supposed to do. It turns out, in order to be a happy, healthy individual, I need friendships with men and women that are about our mutual connection, that are about supporting each other. And so one of the ways to approach this, if there's a lot of upset, possibly communicating to a spouse, I have a support network. I have my recovery folks that I talk with. That's who I'm going to work through the upset with. Because if your behavior gets things going and it's my emotion, I'm the only one who can care for my emotion. I would really like it if you didn't contribute to that emotion anymore. That's what I need you to figure out. So I'll figure out with my support people what I need to handle the upset, to feel okay, to make the decisions that I need to make. But what I need from you is to stop hurting me in that way. Because again, I think in a closed system, there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of bases to cover. So if we're dealing with a lot of upset and a lot of hurt, and we see our spouse become all thumbs in the face of that, and that can come back to a lot of emotional dysregulation. That can come back to like, this relationship can't hold a lot of negativity or big stuff. So if you have support of your own, make plans to turn to that. And that's part of the boundary with the spouse. I'm going to talk with my support group. I'll talk with my girlfriend. I'll talk with my therapist, whoever, about how upset I am. What I need you to do is stop hurting me by no longer doing this, or start doing more of that. So we get really clear on exactly what we need. I often say to clients, if you were to go to a doctor for a procedure and the doctor botched that procedure and it needed to be repaired, you probably wouldn't go to the same doctor to do that. And that's something I have to work a lot with addicts on understanding, is your spouse may not want to come to you with the pain, or it may not be good for them to come to you with the pain right now. In the future, maybe we can work towards that. But right now, you guys having your own support systems and utilizing that is going to help. It's going to help keep the focus on changing behavior so that the relationship is tenable, versus changing behavior and trying to take on all the emotion and planning for a future and figuring out how to repair the past. We kind of have to divvy those jobs up.
I was thinking too with the intentions, it's like, if the intentions are those kind of oblique, cloudy things out there, okay, so you have this intention, what is your plan? And having a concrete plan of, so how are you going to achieve that? And not saying it in a snarky way, I might've said it in a little snarky, but it's like, okay, I hear your intention. I like that intention. What are your steps to ensure that you are able to do that? And then that kind of takes the emotion out of it as well. So it's not a defense. It's like, okay, I hear you saying that. Great. What's the plan?
Yeah. Because I think most of the spouses that I work with, they know that change takes a long time. For heaven's sakes, they've engaged in a lot of their own change throughout their lifetime. And so I really like that what's the plan, because I think it's far more helpful to establish safety when we know what our partner's process might need to look like, or what they intend to have it look like, because we may see them 5 steps into this 10-step process, and we may say the result still hasn't happened, but I know that they're on their journey because I know what their plan is and I know what to look for. So that can buy me some space to step back with some love and watch that process unfold. But I think that's a solid suggestion too. What's your plan? Outline that for me.
Yeah. And then even if you see incremental changes, because it may not be, I went from point A to point Z, but you go, okay, well, I'm noticing those, I see that you're following those steps. Great. That would feel like some progress. We have just a couple minutes left. And one of the things that you mentioned and that I love that you're doing is working with the men who having intensives for men who are a little too tangled up, shall we say, with their mothers, for a variety of reasons. Can you just talk about that? I know you've got an intensive coming up in January, but can you talk a little bit about, that? Maybe next week's topic is, a little bit more about that. I don't know, but
yeah. So in January, I'll be in Phoenix doing this intensive work. This is basically for the man who never had the opportunity to emancipate from mom. And by emancipate, we mean becoming his own person physically, emotionally, intellectually, and relationally. I love this kind of work I do with these men because most of them come with relationships that they care deeply about. They have a girlfriend, they have a spouse, they have a boyfriend who they really want to give their heart to, but it feels disloyal to betray mom in that way because as children, mom's needs overtook their needs. And that's the way they oriented all of their relationships, is, they would pursue what they want, but always with one eye on how's mom doing. And if you are one of these people, or you're in a relationship with one of these people, you know that that doesn't work very well. It feels really stifling. It feels really stilting, and there can be a lot of anger involved in that. I think when development and growth is stopped, anger is a natural result of that. So we really work to help these men move from the ambivalence and the feeling overwhelmed by obligation and resentful of connection into a place where their heart, their body, their mind, their soul is free from the demands of mom, and they're free to choose who they want to love. They're free to choose the relationships they want to have. And that's what we focus on for the weekend, is giving them an emotionally corrective experience that helps them sample, that helps them know what that feels like to be emotionally their own person, physically their own person. And I'm really excited about that opportunity coming up. I'm hoping in some of these future groups, like you said, Tammy, that I get to talk a little more about that entanglement, and a little more about family relationships that are too close and too much, too far into adulthood. Because I think that that tanks us in a big way in relationships going forward.
Yeah, well, it's disloyal to love somebody else if, you know, so it feels like you never really get a chance to be fully loved and known by a spouse.
Yeah, you can find out more about that work. I'm putting it in the chat right now. My website, johntaylorlsw.com. I've got information about that intensive and some of the other work that I'm doing, and I'd love to hear from any of you if you have specific questions or any way that I can help your recovery and healing along.
That's great. So, and our time is up. So thank you all for having joined us. John is going to be doing this every week on Mondays. So watch the sexandrelationshiphealing.com website. He also did a podcast with Rob that's on the various formats, iTunes or Android or Stitcher, whatever way you find them. But yeah, he did a podcast with Rob a few months ago already. So
yeah, the podcast is Thanks for Sharing, and you can find it.
There's that one. So yes,
you on Rob's podcast too.
Ways. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks for sharing, though. Yes, you've got that one too. Which they can probably find that from your website as well, right?
Yeah. My website links up to the podcast.
So more resources. So again, thank you all. We hope to see you again next Monday. Bye. Thank you.